Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Wodrago with the University of Illinois Extension Community and Economic Development Program. We're happy to host another BEAD deep dive with the Illinois Office of Broadband and the Illinois Broadband Lab. And of course, very happy to welcome back Devin Bronstein, who's going to kick off today's session, as well as introduce the full program and our additional guest speaker. Welcome, Devin. Thank you so much for being here, and you can take it from here.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Devin Bronstein here from the Illinois Office of Broadband. We're back with our weekly webinar series diving into different topics related to the BEAD program, Connect Illinois Round 4, to get folks familiar leading up to the launch of our Sub-Grantee selection process. So today's focus will be requirements from NTIA. So we have a guest speaker, Greg Klaus, who will walk us through a handful of specifics from NTIA that we want to make sure that folks are familiar with. To recap, the purpose of our webinar series is to help folks understand various elements of Connect Illinois Round 4, the BEAD program, particularly those aspects that might be new compared with previous Connect Illinois rounds. So we'll have a chance for questions, feedback, and anything else that is on your mind. I'll start with the usual recap and progress to date, and then we'll move over to our NTIA presentation. So as a reminder for anyone new in the audience, this webinar series is focused around the BEAD program, which stands for Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. This is a federal grant program to help get all Americans connected to the internet by providing funding to every state and territory to deploy broadband to all unserved, underserved locations and community anchor institutions. So $42 billion program nationwide. Looking at Illinois specifically, Illinois was allocated $1.04 billion to achieve this mission at the state level. The goal of this program is to connect all unserved and underserved locations, maximizing end-to-end fiber wherever possible, but also leaving the window open and encouraging applications from other technologies such as fixed wireless to make sure that we can meet that mandate of universal connectivity. We'll prioritize projects based on the need and classification of unserved, then underserved, then community anchor institutions. And we'll run our sub-grantee selection process within 1 year of our initial proposal approval, which happened last June. And then sub-grantees will have 4 years to complete their deployments. So hopefully folks are pretty familiar with this timeline right about now. But we are wrapping up our pre-qualification process. So I have in my inbox some final feedback on the remaining pre-qualification submissions. So expect those in your inbox likely today or tomorrow if you have not gotten those already. And then look out for a formal letter, which sort of documents any pre-qualification materials that are still outstanding that we'll want you to work on and revise for that formal application process, but then those that have been pre-approved so you don't have to do that work again for the application process. So excited to be wrapping that up. I've also gotten feedback that folks are interested in seeing a list of providers who participated in pre-qual online. So I just sent out an email to everyone just confirming that folks are comfortable with having their entity name listed on our website as participated. This won't have any sort of outcomes, but rather just the providers who we know are interested and kind of actively already participating in the BEAD program through that pre-qualifications process. So look out for that email from me a couple hours ago. And if you have any questions about that or would like to opt out to being posted, just let me know. Another exciting internal milestone is that we have a close to final draft of the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. I presented that to our sort of decision-making committee here at the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity yesterday, and we do have the green light to move ahead once we get that NTIA approval and publish our final map for 30 days. So getting all of those internal pieces in place, but there's a lot of excitement around this here in Illinois. We are also getting ready to hopefully demo our BEAD map slash project area unit selector tool in the coming few weeks. So this will be a new version of the challenge map, but it'll have kind of the final eligible locations split up into project area units, and folks will have the ability to select different project areas, put them in their shopping cart, download them, kind of play around with that map, indicate must-have PAUs, look at counts within each PAU. So I will be excited to share that once it is ready and in good shape. Waiting on any challenge process curing updates from NTIA. And then I mentioned the 40, I think 41 entities who participated in pre-qual are receiving their final feedback today or tomorrow. So with that, I will hand it over to our Federal Program Officer, Greg Klaus, to run us through today's presentation on some specific requirements from NTIA that you'll see in our application process and throughout the sub-grantee implementation process. So I know NTIA will have their own kind of office hours and support systems, but want to make sure that folks are starting to get familiar with these policies. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then Greg, if you want to take over, I'll hand it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Devin. Let me pull up my slide deck.
If you want me to share, Greg, just let me know. Oh, okay, great.
I think I got it.
We can
Um,
see your whole screen.
there we go. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Uh, Thank you, Devin, for the introduction. My name is Greg Claus. I'm the Federal Program Officer for Illinois with NTIA, National Telecommunication and Information Administration. It's part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. If I haven't met you already, please reach out. I'll give you my email at the end of the presentation. Would love to just talk to you. I'm on the federal side, Devin's on the state side, and together we're trying to make this work so that we can get internet for all Illinoisans. And that's a massive task. So I'm here to help and support the state as they work to implement the BEAD program and the many requirements along with it. I'm also here to help and support any prospective applicants and answer any questions you have and help you throughout the entire process. So today we're focused on the sub-grantee obligations. All of these come from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA for short, and the BEAD NOFO. They set all the foundational requirements for network deployment and service obligations. Remember that this is a state implemented program, so the state of Illinois has their own state laws and policies that they add on top of the BEAD requirements. And that's what previous weekly webinars have been about, focusing on some state-specific laws, for example, Illinois Prevailing Wage Act, Illinois Works Act, and there's a few other things there. Definitely plugging those. This is just the federal requirements on top for the BEAD program. I also want to flag that in this presentation, we have all the obligations, but then we're also going to include some best practices. Just calling them up front, these are just best practices. These are not requirements. And to make sure that we are providing people with ideas as you start to develop your application, think through what the finished product will look like and what you would then be obliged to do. All of these obligations would go into effect once the grant agreement is executed. And that after you apply through the state sub-grantee selection process, the state's going to do several waves of the program. They'll then send all of their results to NTIA for review of their final proposal. And then once we review and approve, then actual grant agreements will be issued. So it's a bit of a timeline ways out, but it's important to know what you're getting into with involvement with the BEAD program. Without further ado, let's dive in. So there are three buckets of the subgrantee obligations that are required from the program: network capabilities, deployment requirements, and service obligations. And I'm going to go through each of these and break them down now. Starting first with the network capabilities. This is kind of the standard one. A lot of people already know this. This BEAD for speed and latency requirements. BEAD requires that all funded networks have 100 megabits download by 20 upload, and that's 1 gig symmetrical for any funded community anchor institution. And then there's a latency requirement that 95% latency measurements during testing window to fall at or below 100 milliseconds round trip time. So subgrantees should deploy robust networks and schedule regular performance testing to ensure that the network that is funded and constructed can meet or exceed these performance standards. Rather straightforward. Switching to outages, network outages, subgrantees must have protocols in place so outages do not exceed 48 hours over any 365-day period. Except in cases of natural disasters or acts of God. So subgrantees should develop a comprehensive outage management plan that includes preventative maintenance schedules, quick response team for outage resolution, and clear communication channel for informing customers about these outages and when they can expect their service to be restored. So preventative maintenance, I'm sure many of your networks already have that. Thinking through, these are best practices, thinking through how to establish strong teams that to do preventative maintenance. And then also if there is an incident that occurs, that you have a rapid response protocol and the team is fully trained and aware of all the procedures. Switching from network requirements to deployment requirements, again, we're still going through all of the subgrantee obligations. The timeline. So BEAD-funded networks, once you are awarded your grant document from the state and you sign it, you will have 4 years to build and deploy your network that you said you're going to build. And that's 4 years from the date of signing that grant agreement. The state will also establish milestones that you'll have to meet as you go. That likely is going to happen in the fixed amount subaward. So this is another topic already discussed in the previous BEAD webinars. Definitely check that out if you haven't already looked at it. But this is something the state has decided to do with implementing BEAD, that they're going to establish benchmarks for performance and network, or not performance, for our network build out. And those benchmarks will then be used for how funds are reimbursed and how you'll receive your funding. But also meeting these milestones help establish that you're following in compliance with the BEAD benchmarks that are needed. They won't be anything longer than 4 years. And you'll have to do regular progress reports to the state as part of your monitoring requirements. Extensions are possible beyond that 4 year, but this is only something that can be granted by the Assistant Secretary of Commerce with U.S. Department of Commerce. And just full upfront, this is our plan not to give extensions. These are homes and businesses that desperately need internet now, and we don't want to have it extended beyond then. So 4 years is the time frame here. Best practices. So as if you're doing a fiber deployment or you're thinking about doing a fiber deployment, think about timelines and your gating times, such as local permitting. How long is that going to take? Underground utility locating. Build that all into your project timeline so you're prepared with that 4 year window. Fixed wireless rollout. That can look similar to, how many towers are you going to add turning on, and what's that activation schedule look like? Again, you have the same issues to deal with local permitting, utility locates, etc. Conduit access point. The requirement is that underground network deployments must include excess conduit capacity and regular conduit access points for interconnection by others. So prospective grantees should propose a plan for the placement and interval of conduit access points in their application, ensuring enough capacity for future expansion and access. So if you're thinking about a citywide broadband deployment, best practice is to do integrated conduit access points every 300 meters. If you're thinking about if you're building a network that goes through a highway, you should consider, where your access points are, potentially allowing for public Wi-Fi services at rest stops or parks along the way, and state traffic management connectivity. These are, again, best practices, not requirements, but definitely something you should integrate into your plan. Moving on from deployment requirements to service obligations, I want to just briefly touch on the low-cost plan. This is a requirement to provide a low-cost service option, and that's covered again in a previous webinar, and it has Illinois-specific requirements. The state established what their low-cost service option was, and they explained it previously. So definitely watch that program. Moving on to the consumer protection requirements and access to service requirements, we'll lump these two together. Prospective grantees are prohibited from imposing data usage caps on any BEAD-funded networks or imposing unjust or unreasonable network management practices. Access to service requirement is that subgrantees are required to provide consumers of BEAD-funded networks with reasonable and non-discriminatory terms and conditions. So best practices here are transparent billing, make sure you're including all the fees, explain promotions, have a customer service protocol that sets up, how customers can view their bill and how they'll receive it, how maybe you're even having accessibility features included, that multilingual support. So as people, as you're expanding to new communities, that everyone is able to be aware of all of the conditions and requirements of their bill as of their service obligation. And then the other standard installation, you are allowed standard installation fees, but I just want to flag that the requirement from BEAD is that networks get deployed, and a customer who calls in, the provider would have 10 business days to make sure that that customer is connected with any BEAD funded network. Public notice requirement. So subgrantees are required to conduct public awareness campaigns aimed at increasing broadband adoption. That's the whole point of this program, is to get internet to all, and it does us no good if it's in the ground or in the air and it's not actually in people's homes. So this is a key component here, public notice campaigns. You do have to include information about the low-cost service option, and if the homeowner or the resident is eligible for that option. Federal subsidies for low-income households. The BEAD NOFA was drafted at the time when the Affordable Connectivity Program was in place. It is expired currently, but it might come back. And that would be required. There's also Lifeline and other potential programs that households could be eligible for. And it must be conducted in an equitable and non-discriminatory manner. So you're required to describe your public notice plan in your BEAD application. And that way we'll be aware of what you're planning to do. If you're doing a new service launch, you could do a direct mail campaign, host community question and answer session, work with the local municipality or county to use whatever distribution methods that they have. So in a water bill, you could put your notice in so that you're making sure all new potential customers are aware of this service. Promotional campaigns, social media, local radio. How are you targeting specific demographics? Are there community anchor institutions you could partner with and do promotion there. And if you're doing any service upgrades, I didn't mention that here, but remember BEAD-funded networks can upgrade service so that it meets that 100 by 20 requirement. If you're doing those updates and you already have existing customers, you should make sure that they're aware of the upgrades here, but then also look at potential new customers and make sure that they're aware of the improvements, upcoming changes, expected benefits, potential network disruptions as you guys are deploying the new service. And let's move on to interconnection requirements and wholesale access. This requirement is specific for if you are building a middle mile network to then do last mile deployment. That is an eligible expense in BEAD if you are building out to any location, but that doesn't currently have enough capacity and middle mile support. You can include in your BEAD application to connect unserved and underserved locations, a middle mile component. And if you do, networks funded by the BEAD program are designed to allow interconnection with other service providers at just, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates. So contracts should specify interconnection points and terms to ensure fairness and promote competition. Subgrantees must adhere to any local, state, and federal regulation governing interconnection. Additionally, it is important to align with industry standards for pricing and technical specifications. That might look different at urban and rural connections. And this is separate from the scoring criteria that the state is using, which does include additional points for open access networks. And then again, last in service obligations, we're going to talk through cybersecurity and supply chain risk management requirement. So prospective subgrantees must attest to having a cybersecurity and supply chain risk management plan in place or ready to be operationalized that reflect the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST for short. They have a NIST cybersecurity and NIST supply chain risk management framework. If you're not familiar with those, I highly encourage you to look at those. They're available online. There's a 2.0 version that's also available. The requirement here is that once the network is deployed, that you have these practices in place and that you're operationalizing them. You'll have to also explain further what your practices will look like in your application when you submit. Implementing advanced threat detection systems. What does that look like at your system level, at your network level? Are you conducting regular penetration testing to evaluate the effectiveness of existing security measures? Securing the supply chain, securing the software supply chain. So this is, where are you purchasing your software from? Same for hardware. Are you making sure it complies with internationally recognized cybersecurity framework? And are you training your staff, making sure that they are aware of all the procedures and that they have knowledge about what happens if the threat is identified, what they do in there, and you're doing response drills to make sure everyone's compliant. This leads us to all the hardware and software components, making sure they're secure and so sourced from reputable suppliers. It's a perfect segue to the other requirement I'm going to talk about, which is BABA for short. But what is BABA? It is the Build America, Buy America Act, and that was signed as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the same funding source that allowed for BEAD to be created. So again, signed in November 2021, it requires that all iron, steel, manufactured products and construction materials include used in infrastructure projects, which includes high-speed internet networks, are produced in the United States. So anything that's using taxpayer dollars in the US, we want to make sure that it's built in the US. this is great for job creation. Makes sense. So you're onshoring, and the funding here is being used to improve manufacturing and training and skills, hiring local labor. We're boosting economic resilience and empowering local businesses. All of these three things are a driving force behind BABA. I do want to say that this is the law and the requirement. But then the Department of Commerce, NTIA, looked at how exactly does BABA impact the BEAD program. And so as part of a lengthy review period and public comment window, NTIA did put out a BABA waiver. So there's a few exceptions that have been granted in how BABA is implemented, specifically for the BEAD program. The waiver was issued on February 23rd, earlier this year. And during this whole process, NTI worked closely with manufacturers to ensure that they can produce necessary equipment for the BEAD program domestically. That's on time, on scale, and at competitive prices. This whole program is $42.45 billion, and there's going to be a lot of need for additional network components that didn't exist before. And so our colleagues at the Commerce Department worked aggressively. There's a slide in a little bit I'll show you that displays all the ramped up production happening across the United States. The waiver decision reflect extensive stakeholder engagement with affected labor and industry communities. And overall, 385 meetings were held over the past year, many with the largest suppliers in the field, as well as trade associations. So exactly how does BABA impact the BEAD program? All this information is available online, and I will make sure Devin has the resources you can look through more closely. So the big takeaway is that optical fiber and fiber optic cable do require domestic production. So you'll have to source from domestic suppliers. This is something we've looked at, and there will be sufficient capacity, and that's what all the producers that we're talking to are working on now, is ramping up that production so that there's capacity for everyone to purchase that, if that's what your network is that you're looking to deploy. For electronics, we'll also require domestic production. This is optical line terminals, OLT line cards, optic pluggables, and standalone optical network terminals. NTIA provides specific guidance regarding manufacturing processes that must occur in the U.S. for these categories of electronics to be BABA compliant. And NTIA does waive the 55% cost of components test. This is really in the weeds now, but I'll explain it a little bit when we get to the next couple slides. Other domestic production requirements are any cabinets, vaults, and below ground housing, pedestals and other above ground housing, closures, and terminals. So NTIA defines and then provides specific guidance regarding manufacturing processes that must occur in the U.S. for these four categories of enclosures. And NTIA upholds the 55% cost of components test. So BABA self-certification and reporting requirements. As subgrantees, you will have to report where you purchase all of your materials from, but there's also how do you make sure that you're purchasing BABA compliant materials? Well, that's the self-certification. So companies will self-certify that their products are BEAD compliant, and BEAD BABA compliant specifically. Manufacturers need to represent to the subgrantee that their equipment complies with this BABA waiver. NTIA plans to post a list of companies that have self-certified all their specific equipment. It'll have down to the item number exactly what is compliant with the BABA waiver here. That is going to be posted online. I checked yesterday and I have not seen it yet, but I know it's coming soon. And as of February, when the BABA waiver was approved, we've seen a number of companies announce major investments and expansions and the creation of thousands of new jobs to meet these BABA requirements. When it comes to creating and protecting American jobs, NTIA took the strongest approach to build America by America. After careful review of typical network spend on fiber networks, we believe that close to 90% of BEAD funds spent on equipment will be spent on equipment that's manufactured in the United States. This map shows all the different companies across the country that are manufacturing BABA compliant materials, as close to Nokia, which is right across the border, in Kenosha, all across the entire country, and not too far, Calyx in Michigan, and across the way is more added. This is a map from February too, and then more have been added since then. That's my slide deck. Here's my contact information, my email, and my phone number. Feel free to email, call, or text. I'm here to help and support. And these are rather specific requirements. And if you have any questions on them, I'm happy to talk to you. Or if it's a question I can't answer, I can hunt down the answer from all of my very esteemed colleagues in NTIA. With that, I will pass it off if there's any questions. I have not monitored the chat at all, so let's see.
Thanks, Greg.
It might be there.
You can pull down your screen and we
There
can
we go.
take any questions. I know that was a lot, so I'm happy to hang on the line for a bit to see if there are questions, and otherwise we'll be sharing out the slides and various NTIA resources that folks can refer to.
And hi, Carl. I see your message in the chat. I'm going to shoot you an email and we can set up some time to talk.
All right, any questions? Is there a website where we could find more detail about NTIA BABA waivers?
Yes, great question. Let me find it and I'll put it in the chat, and then Devin will also share it with you.
Great.
And like I mentioned, that list of BABA compliant suppliers is not yet available, but all those that do self-certify will be posted on our site, and that's something you can consult when you're purchasing all the supplies.
We'll give it another minute to see if there are other questions, and otherwise we can give folks some time back today.
And I'll just add that I can go ahead and allow participants to unmute themselves as well. And so if someone wants to do the raise hand or unmute themselves and ask a question using their mic instead of writing in the chat, that is fine as well.
We have one more question in the chat. What detail do we need from vendors in their certification letters?
Oh, great question. So this is not the deep. So okay, to answer your question, vendors are going to, or manufacturers are going to self-certify, and there's going to be a whole form. They'll say exactly which product, what item number, all of that is compliant. We'll post on our website. My expectation is that vendors will be reviewing the posted materials and then making sure that anything that they're sourcing then shows that it's BABA self-certified compliant. And that's what you would then look at for when you're talking to your different vendors, that those are materials that they've self-certified. This takes the onus off of individual operators from making sure all of the materials are compliant, as this is a nationwide requirement. If they choose not to officially self-certify through Department of Commerce, that does put the requirement on the sub-grantee to ensure compliance. So we have a FAQ that goes through each of the different materials and which, if it's a component that has to be 100% domestic manufactured or if it has to be 55%, that threshold test. So it does put the onus on the sub-grantee to review and ensure compliance. And then there'll be a Excel file that you'll have to complete with all of the materials you purchased, and that your certification that that was compliant. I think we'll also have additional resources as the time gets closer, once people start making these purchases that is compliant, including webinars and support. Do you have, or do you anticipate a date when the compiled list of ABA compliant providers will be published? I don't. That's a great question, and that's something I'm going to check on from our side, and I can follow up with Devin, since this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I will say that when there are updates, the website posted, that will be really helpful to keep checking as these things come out. That will be updated.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for joining us. If folks have other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to broadband@illinois.gov as per usual, and we'll get your questions routed to the right place. Next week, we will have another NTIA guest speaker talking about the NEPA requirements. So stay tuned for that. And I think we can close out and give folks about 20 minutes back.
Thank you, Devin. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks so much, Greg. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.